The man, Noor, could never have imagined that despite having only one skill, counter, he might possess the potential to become the greatest adventurer. He practiced with a wooden sword, and within a year, he could deflect over 10 wooden rods simultaneously. 3 more years passed, and he evolved from deflecting 10 rods to 100. After a decade, he unwittingly reached the ability to parry thousands of rods at once. Yet Noor was completely unaware of his own strength. The sword technique he had honed over the years was considered the most rudimentary form of parrying, a skill everyone knew. Orphaned from a young age, he could only live at the bottom of society. This led Noor, who believed himself to be weak, to spend his days doing menial labor or helping neighbors find their lost cats, oblivious to the fact that his abilities had already surpassed those of the legendary sword saints. However, during an unexpected event, he accidentally unlocked his potential. What was thought to be a useless skill suddenly proved immensely powerful, allowing him to instantly kill the Minotaur King, a creature even the kingdom's nobility feared, right before everyone's eyes. In this era where adventurers were ranked, Noor was placed at the very lowest, F level. This was due to a special training facility known as the Training Ground, where people could choose from 6 different professions. Surprisingly, after undergoing training in all available professions, Noor failed to learn any skills deemed essential for adventurers, leading the Training Ground to categorize him as the weakest, F level. Despite this, Noor did not give up entirely. He humbly pleaded with the Guildmaster, hoping to be granted the title of adventurer. Fortunately, the Guildmaster agreed to his request and occasionally provided him with some tasks to sustain his life. Gradually, Noor discovered that aside from his defensive skills, which were deemed useless, other abilities could subtly change his life. For instance, the strength enhancement skill he learned at the warrior training facility allowed him to carry goods 5 times heavier than usual. Or the minor healing skill, considered so low level that it wouldn't even be used on dogs, helped alleviate his fatigue with continued use. Though he knew these skills were not practiced as diligently as his parrying, they always managed to help him at critical moments. Soon, Noor's task for the day was also drawing to a close. After his usual refusal of the supervisor's joking offer, he planned to head home to continue training his parrying skill. However, just as he was leaving, he caught a glimpse of a faint beam of light not far away. Someone was shouting for help, and at the same time, a gigantic bull appeared. Several royal guards were engaging it head-on, but they were no match for the Minotaur King and were swiftly cut down by its giant axe. Noor saw a girl in imminent danger and decisively used his stone-throwing skill. He hadn't thought to defeat the monster with this skill, merely hoping to divert its attention. Fortunately, the ploy worked, and the Minotaur King turned its focus to him. Just as the girl thought Noor was doomed, he cleverly dodged the attack, realizing that the enemy's strikes were not only heavy, but also fast. Even though he could parry, his sword was nearly knocked out of his hand. Noor didn't know how many times he could deflect such attacks, so he needed to find an opportunity to counterattack. It was then that Noor suddenly realized he didn't have any skills for counterattacking. What was he to do? Suddenly, Noor's thoughts were interrupted by the Minotaur King's next attack, which was aimed at the very spot where the girl was standing. Using his strength enhancement at the last moment and a parry, the cost was his sword being shattered. Was he going to die here? As he looked at the broken sword in his hand and used his parry, the weapon he deflected decapitated the monster. Noor had reached his limit, and he doubted himself. Despite years of training, he was left in such a sorry state by a mere town's bull. How could he possibly adventure around the world? The girl witnessed this scene, and just as she was preparing to thank him, Noor had disappeared without a trace. Looking at his trembling hands, Noor knew he needed more training. Noor had never expected that he would accidentally save a princess who had been imprisoned. Upon hearing the news, the king personally bestowed upon him an epic greatsword, simply because Noor was unaware that in order to kill Celia, the enemy nation had summoned Milo Talos, a monster from the abyss that even S-rank adventurers feared. However, Noor ended up beheading the monster with a single strike. Overnight, rumors spread throughout the streets. A mysterious figure wielding a rusty iron sword had slain Milo Talos in just 2.5 seconds. After the battle, the prince dispatched an elite troop to investigate, but they ended up being mistaken by Noor for perverts and shaken off. When he returned to the guild master was worried, thinking something had happened to Noor since a rare monster had appeared near the construction site where Noor had been working the previous night. Noor explained that he was too tired from completing a mission yesterday and had gone home, stopping by to clean his grandmother's drain on the way, which is why he was so dirty. Relieved, the guild master mentioned that the monster last night was extremely terrifying, noting that even he, a former A-rank adventurer, would not have escaped had he encountered it. Fortunately, it was slain by a mysterious man. Noor inwardly sighed in relief that he had only encountered a cow. After settling his payment for yesterday's work, Noor was about to accept a new mission when a voice suddenly stopped him from behind. It was the girl he had saved the day before, which almost scared the guildmaster to death, clearly aware of the girl's identity. The girl sought out Noor to express her gratitude for saving her life, but since the place was crowded, she hoped to speak with him privately outside. Hearing this, the guildmaster immediately intervened, cautioning Noor to be careful not to offend her due to her special status and to avoid drawing attention. The girl activated sound shield and concealment skills, making the nearby soldiers completely unaware of their presence. She apologized for using a remote sensing skill to find Noor and for taking him away while talking to the guildmaster. To repay Noor for saving her life, her father wanted to meet him and was prepared to use the family fortune to give him the sincerest thanks. However, Noor felt that defeating a cow in the town was nothing special, and that a simple thank you was more than enough. The girl was taken aback, insisting on giving Noor some benefits, but he really didn't need anything. Noor had never expected the girl to start crying as she spoke, even stating that she would stay by his side until he was willing to accept her thanks. Seeing the girl's relentless determination, Noor was reminded of his own childhood determination to become an adventurer, constantly pleading with his teacher to let him train. Thus, Noor also agreed, while stating that he would not accept an overly extravagant thank you. In the blink of an eye, the young girl had brought Noor to a massive mansion. It was then that Noor understood why the guild master had instructed him to mind his manners. The other party must be a wealthy family or nobility. The girl's name was Lindbergh Clays. Along the way, they encountered a female knight named Inez, who, upon learning that Noor was Lindbergh's lifesaver and was going to meet her father, took it upon herself to lead the way. Noor, mistaking her for a maid due to her armor, wondered how she managed to clean while dressed so heavily. However, for some reason, Noor felt that Inez was quite wary of him. They hadn't walked far before encountering a blonde knight. Seeing Noor behind Lindbergh, he must have assumed he was the formidable adventurer from the rumors, but judging by his attire, he seemed weak. Inez interrupted him and suggested they all head to the hall together, whispering that the more guards, the better. The blonde knight quickly understood that the unremarkable man in front of him was not as simple as he appeared. Meanwhile, in the hall, the king and his son Rain were discussing the imminent outbreak of war, as the neighboring country had violated a non-aggression treaty. The previously summoned Milo Taulos was part of their scheme to force the king to hand over the ownership of a labyrinth. If refused, more threats would follow. The war between the two countries had become inevitable. As everyone arrived in the hall, the knights all knelt down. Being from a remote area and not of noble birth, Noor was clueless about the etiquette for such an occasion and apologized in advance for any possible rudeness. However, this pleased the king, who didn't mind the lack of formalities and found it more comfortable to converse this way. The king once again thanked Noor. Without his intervention, his daughter might have been reincarnated by now. Noor, not overly concerned, thought that accepting the thanks meant he could soon go home to bathe and rest. But the king insisted that Noor could not leave empty-handed, offering him land or wealth, whatever he wished. Noor, however, wanted nothing. This puzzled the king, who then recalled that the kingdom possessed the world's oldest labyrinth, filled with rare treasures stored in the treasure hall. He decided to offer Noor half of the treasures stored there, but Noor still refused. Left with no choice, the king noticed the great sword behind him. Thus, he made a choice for Noor. The sword, though not very attractive and once used by the king himself, had become merely a decorative piece. Worried that Noor might refuse again, the king suggested that since he had retired many years ago, it would be better for the sword to be in Noor's hands rather than continue to lie dormant here. However, as soon as Noor grasped it, he felt an immense weight, and with his enhanced strength, he swung the sword, unleashing a powerful wave of energy. The king was surprised that Noor could wield the two-handed sword with just one hand. The king then made another request to Noor, asking him, if he didn't mind, to train Lindbergh. With recent unrest everywhere, it would be beneficial for her to learn by Noor's side. Confused, Noor felt he had little to teach, being weak himself, and believed such matters should be decided by the individuals concerned, feeling that parental interference was generally unwise. This amused the king, who decided to leave the decision up to Lindbergh herself. At this point, Noor bid farewell to the king. On his way back, Noor felt the greatsword in his hand. Such a heavy sword was perfect for training. Even the width of this greatsword was about the same as the drainage ditch at his grandmother's house. If used to clean the ditch, the efficiency would definitely increase significantly. The king might never know that Noor's ideas were so outlandish. It was at that moment that the blonde-haired man blocked Noor's path. His name was Gilbert, and he wanted to witness Noor's strength. The girl casually swung her dagger, and the giant tree behind her split into two in an instant. This was the holy technique of the thief class, the dragon blade. Then, she pulled out the shadowless sword, showing Noor the swordsman class's holy technique. It turns out, the girl's purpose in demonstrating her power was to ask Noor to be her master. Little did she know, at that moment, Noor was utterly bewildered. After all, he only knew one move: parry. Why would this genius, proficient in 6 class techniques, want him as a master? To show the girl his own weakness, Noor used a plain and simple life skill. Unexpectedly, this act only deepened the girl's misunderstanding. Aside from Lindbergh, another person had recently witnessed Noor's capabilities. Gilbert, known as the Saint of Spears and a battle enthusiast, often challenges strong opponents to duels. Today, he had approached Noor, but as the fight progressed, he realized something was off. No matter how he attacked, he couldn't hit his opponent. Noor thought Gilbert was deliberately holding back, reluctantly telling him not to worry about him and to go all out. Hearing this, Gilbert became serious, and his speed increased significantly. However, to Noor, although Gilbert was faster, he was completely unguarded at the moment of each dodge. It seemed as if he was intentionally allowing himself to be attacked. Noor believed these were deliberate flaws, and he must not be deceived. Unbeknownst to him, Gilbert was profoundly shocked. No matter which spear technique he employed, he just couldn't hit his opponent. Then Noor asked him to speed up even more. An angry Gilbert unleashed his ultimate move, thinking he had the upper hand. But when the smoke cleared, he found his opponent had already dodged. Yet, Noor conceded defeat and left, fearing for his safety afterward. He had thought he was improving, but Gilbert's move dispelled that notion. At that moment, he had used all his strength to enhance his body and stealth, just managing to dodge that shot. Had Gilbert not intentionally slowed down, he would have been dead. Indeed, a true master is beyond his understanding. All the while, that master was nearly shutting down internally. His subordinates thought Gilbert had won, but only Gilbert knew how strong that man really was. To dodge attacks so effortlessly and not even strike back was one thing, but to even evade a supersonic spear technique without clearly seeing the opponent's movements was another. What frustrated Gilbert even more was that he thought Noor had conceded defeat and left just to save his own face because his subordinates were present. However, Gilbert couldn't have guessed that Noor left simply because he had more important things to do. It was time for him to go back and clean up the garbage. Surprisingly, he used a divine sword forged by a dragon to clean the sewer. More absurdly, while looking at the giant sword, Noor thought of even more uses for it, such as using the blade as a boat paddle, or even to grill pizzas. He even considered making a good amount of money by using it for teppanyaki. Though the ideas were pleasant, he was only capable of a basic fire magic technique, light fire, which wasn't quite enough for cooking teppanyaki. Lindbergh's arrival interrupted Noor's thoughts. After chatting for a while, Noor learned that she had specifically come to ask him to be her master. She volunteered to take care of his daily life and hoped to learn techniques and knowledge from him during that time. This puzzled Noor all the more, as it seemed unreasonable for anyone to want him as a teacher. Therefore, Noor outright rejected her. Lindbergh thought Noor was rejecting her because he saw her as weak, and she quickly asserted that she was the best student from the 6 major vocational academies. Even so, Noor rejected her again, nearly bringing Lindbergh to tears. In her view, Noor must have thought she was boasting. She then took out her wand and cast 2 high-level magic spells. Following that, she pulled out a dagger and demonstrated the thief class's holy technique, slicing a giant tree behind her in half instantly. She then showed the swordsman class's holy technique, cutting another large tree in half. Noor hurriedly stopped the excited Lindbergh. Having witnessed the skills Lindbergh had just displayed, Noor realized she was a super genius. Compared to himself, who only knew basic skills, her excellence made him feel somewhat embarrassed. To show Lindbergh how inept he was, Noor decided to demonstrate it to her in reality. On the way out, Lindbergh, deep in thought, looked at her own light fire technique. The sage Oaken from the Magic Academy had once shown her his light fire technique, which was larger than usual. Oaken explained that even a basic ignition skill after his 200 years of accumulation could become stronger, something not achievable overnight. However, the light fire technique Noor demonstrated was several times larger than that of Oaken, the world's top magician, which shocked Lindbergh into silence. The misunderstanding deepened. Instead of discouraging Lindbergh, it only made her more determined to become his apprentice. The man could never have imagined that the goblin, considered the weakest creature in people's tales, was actually a muscular hunk with 8-pack abs. What surprised him even more was that this was not just any goblin. It was a disaster-level goblin emperor. As for Tuka, who was on his first adventure, he thought it was just a normal goblin because he had heard that goblins have green skin, stand on 2 feet like humans, and have beast-like sharp eyes. Moreover, his quest for the day involved goblins, so everything seemed to match up. Ever since Lindbergh had joined him, Tuka had been able to accept quests near the royal capital. As a B-level adventurer, Lindbergh could have taken on more challenging quests, but with the lowest level Tuka, they could only hunt weaker goblins. However, even if it was just goblins, Tuka was very excited. After all, these creatures were what adventurers used to test their skills, and this was also his first time accepting a quest outside the city. As the two headed towards the forest of monsters in the outskirts, Tuka asked what kind of creature a goblin was. Lindbergh was momentarily stunned by the question, but then realized Tuka was testing whether she knew about goblins. She then seriously answered about the places where goblins were found, and their habits. This made Tuka feel even more embarrassed because it was clear that Lindbergh knew much more than he did. What could he possibly teach Lindbergh? His embarrassment grew when, despite seeing nothing ahead, Lindbergh sensed the presence of a monster and immediately used a skill to reveal hidden beings. Indeed, a giant goblin appeared, marking the first time Tuka had seen one. Tuka found that the goblin was much larger than he had imagined. Although what he saw was completely different from the rumors, the physical characteristics matched perfectly, which surprised him. Such a robust body was actually considered a mere underling by the people. Watching Lindbergh stare blankly to the side, Tuka thought she lacked practical experience. However, unbeknownst to him, Lindbergh was not inexperienced. Rather, she was too experienced. She had recognized that this was a goblin king, a disaster-class mutant, an illegally created magical creature. Hearing Tuka psyching himself up, Lindbergh thought he had sensed the presence of the Goblin King, which is why he had shown naive joy when receiving the quest. It turned out all of this was a play he staged to secretly eliminate the crisis. With this realization, Lindbergh felt more confident. However, the Goblin King was not infamous for nothing. Besides being tough-skinned, its body was also very agile. Lindbergh released several skills in succession, all of which were dodged by its nimble movements. Although she managed to hit the Goblin King with an explosion spell, Lindbergh quickly discovered that it could rapidly heal itself using a magic stone on its head. If this continued, they would run out of stamina and magic before even injuring the Goblin King. However, after learning the source of the Goblin King's power came from the magic stone, Tuka thought of a strategy to counter it. He suggested that Lindbergh release an explosion spell from behind while he used the propulsion speed to charge at the Goblin King. Thus, Tuka was propelled forward by the powerful energy. Combined with his own physical enhancement, he leaped up and delivered a direct blow to the Goblin King's head. The monster's magic stone fell off, and losing its power, the Goblin King's body began to falter. Now, it was like a moving, large target. Lindbergh simply used fire magic to completely burn it to ashes. Back at the guild, the two accurately reported the battle situation. However, the guildmaster, unaware of the true circumstances, commented that even if the target was a goblin, it was still a bit challenging for beginners. What puzzled the guildmaster was that the magic stone of a goblin should be hidden in the heart or throat, but Tuka claimed it was on the forehead. The guildmaster then asked them to provide proof of killing the goblin, but the two fools had already burned the goblin to ashes. The girl accidentally discovered that by concentrating, she could unleash incredible power. However, this unknown gift ended up harming her companions at the orphanage. The girl's abilities also alarmed the kingdom's 3 saints, who calmed the panicked girl and called this power a blessing bestowed upon her by the heavens. Yet the blessing was extremely prone to losing control, and in the worst cases, it could easily destroy a nation. Later, the girl became the disciple of the Shield Saint, and under his guidance, her once wild talent became the strongest shield, capable of blocking all attacks and magic. But even after many years, the shadow of having hurt her companions could not be erased. The girl subconsciously kept her distance from others and was not easily swayed by their emotions. That was until she met that man. It was during a prolonged battle against a beast tide that the Shield Saint mentioned the name of this man. Not just this time, since she had been following the Shield Saint. She had heard this name many times. A person whose strength even the Shield Saint acknowledged. This stirred inside Inez an envy she shouldn't have felt. And now, that man was sitting right behind her. On the surface, she accompanied the male protagonist and another to the mountainous region on a mission commissioned by the prince. But she also carried a secret order from the prince. What seemed to be an ordinary mission heading northwest was actually a contingency plan to help Lindbergh escape a life-threatening crisis. The prince discovered a conspiracy by the Magocracy against the kingdom. If Inez heard the news of the capital's destruction during the mission, she was to take Lindbergh to the Holy Pope's nation according to the prince's orders. However, Noor was unaware of these details. To him, this just seemed like a well-funded mission. No different from a sightseeing trip, especially since he had never been outside the capital's vicinity. Moreover, Inez, who bore the title of Shield of the Gods, and whose strength was comparable to that of the Gun Saint, who could defeat a giant dragon alone, was accompanying them. He thought he would just be along for the ride on this mission, unaware of the prince's escape plan that inadvertently made them encounter the most powerful monster of the attack. It was Noor who first noticed something amiss. In the middle of an otherwise neat field, there was a strange trace that looked like something had trampled through it. Sure enough, upon hearing this, Lindbergh cast a spell to remove concealment in that direction, revealing a legendary monster, the Black Death Dragon. Simultaneously, the capital also faced an onslaught of formidable monsters, all part of the Magocracy's plot against the kingdom. The kingdom deployed various corps and its 6 strongest masters to combat this threat. Meanwhile, a young boy appeared at the same time as the Black Death Dragon. As the concealment vanished, he was flung away by the monster's tail. Seeing the boy about to be killed by the Black Death Dragon, Noor instantly rushed in that direction and blocked all attacks with his parry. However, Inez noticed that the boy's appearance next to the Black Death Dragon was no coincidence. He appeared simultaneously after the concealment was removed. Upon hearing this, Lindbergh immediately thought of something. The demon race, which looks human, but has the ability to communicate with monsters. 200 years ago, the demon race controlled ferocious monsters and nearly flattened the Holy Pope's nation, one of the major powers. Subsequently, the human race drove the demon race to extinction. Given the appearance of the Goblin Emperor, it seemed that descendants of the demon race still secretly survived. The boy's identity was undoubtedly a remnant of the demon race. It was likely that the removal of concealment accidentally disrupted the mental control over the monsters. Noor was actually saving an enemy. Lindbergh didn't think much about this. The priority was to help Noor fight the Black Death Dragon. However, Inez stopped her, stating that Noor was undoubtedly doomed to die. Although the Black Death Dragon's power wasn't strong, and its speed was just average, in Noor's eyes, the Black Death Dragon was even weaker than the Goblin Emperor. However, the next attack harshly taught him a lesson. A countless amount of black mist sprayed out of the dragon's mouth. If he dodged now, the boy would surely be hit, so he decided to parry the eerie black mist. Unexpectedly, the black mist was an unblockable status effect skill. This was the truly terrifying aspect of the Black Death Dragon. The venom it sprayed was so deadly that even the healing saint could not cure it if present. Inez stopped the frantic Linneberg again. She had already foreseen Noor's inevitable death. Now the most important thing was not to avenge Noor, but to protect the princess of the kingdom. 2.5 seconds later, an even more potent poison mist struck, affecting even birds flying high in the sky. However, what Inez didn't expect was that Noor not only survived, but continued to fight the Black Death Dragon amidst the black mist. Even more unexpectedly, Noor's basic skill, minor healing, proved more effective than the so-called healing saint's skills. Watching Noor risk his life to protect others, Inez finally understood that this was the shield she had always been pursuing. But even so, she still believed Noor was destined to die. There was no way to fight against the Black Death Dragon, and even though Noor had fallen, he now had the confidence to win. The girl could never have imagined that her master, who was supposed to die in the deadly poisonous fog, miraculously stood up again, looking unharmed. It was very strange because the miasma exhaled by the Black Death Dragon was fatal to ordinary people, with just one breath. Even the medic saint could not reverse such a fate. Just moments ago, Noor had been bleeding from 7 orifices, appearing beyond medical help. Inez had even given up on rescuing Noor. Unexpectedly, after Noor collapsed, he felt that the Black Dragon was not so formidable after all. It turns out that since childhood, Noor had been a tough kid with a hard fate. Due to the death of his parents and his inability to become an adventurer, he had to live alone in the mountains. Unfamiliar with the ingredients, he accidentally ate highly poisonous plants. Fortunately, the minute healing awakened during his training and a night of rinsing with clear water barely kept him alive. Later, he learned from a book that this was a kind of dragon-slaying grass. His mother had told him it was something he should never eat. After Noor fully recovered, to his surprise, he was bitten by a venomous snake. Using treatment afterward not only gave him resistance but also made him immune to poisoning. Since he was not afraid of poison, he could now roast and eat venomous snakes. The next day, he deliberately caught another to test his resistance. Indeed, the spread of the toxin was very slow. Noor thought this might be an opportunity to learn a new skill. Thus, he began to actively seek poisonous creatures to eat. Although he did not learn new skills, it made him immune to all poisons. To be precise, he became more resistant. As long as he was not instantly poisoned to death, he could survive with healing. Noor also made an unexpected discovery, that poisonous creatures were surprisingly delicious. As for why Noor was bleeding from 7 orifices just now, it turned out he had given his healing to the white-haired boy behind him, so he himself had sprayed a bit of blood. However, with Noor's experience, he could handle such monsters easily. In the next second, as the Black Death Dragon launched a life-bursting strike, Noor seized the opportunity to pierce its body. Subsequently, people saw only a pile of remnants of the monster. Coming to his senses, he asked about the boy's situation. Unexpectedly, the boy said that the monster was supposed to be brought to town as per an agreement with someone else. Noor was extremely alarmed. Could it be that the frog was indeed a high-grade ingredient? Could the Black Death Dragon be the precious frog he had raised himself? Noor mistakenly thought he had destroyed the important merchandise the boy was supposed to deliver to town. His sudden apology completely confused the boy, although he also did not know why he was supposed to bring the monster to town, but it was definitely not to be used as food. Before this, the boy had been living in a dark, sunless dungeon. As one of the few demons in this world, they were kept like livestock by humans. But one day, the slave master told him that as long as he obediently moved together with this demon creature, not only would there be no more groundless beatings, but he would also be allowed to enjoy delicious food to his heart's content. Moreover, the other demons there would enjoy the same treatment. After that, the boy started his mission blindfolded. Unexpectedly, he was discovered by a princess along the way. Once the concealment barrier was removed, his mental control over the demon was also released. Thinking about how his failure would cause his companions to suffer again, the boy felt extremely guilty. But what was done was done. He accepted his fate. Although he hadn't been able to help others, at least he had not harmed anyone. Dying here might not be such a bad thing. He only prayed that he wouldn't be beaten too harshly in his next life, hoping he might be of some help to someone and perhaps even taste the so-called delicious food. It It was at this moment that Noor intervened to save him, and immediately treated him after the demon exhaled poisonous gas. Unexpectedly, afterwards, Noor even offered to compensate him, which the boy could hardly accept. Later, Noor also learned that the boy could control demons, which made him envious, for he had often thought how useful it would be if he had such a skill, to have demons help with farming during the day and with guarding at night. However, what surprised Noor even more was that the boy was born with this ability. The boy stuttered that it was a demon trait. People of the demon race all have this ability. But Noor, being somewhat hard of hearing, misunderstood. Although Noor's thought processes were not on point, Lindbergh knew about the boy's identity. What concerned her more, however, was that Noor, having inhaled the poisonous fog, was still bursting with vitality. The only reason she could think of was holy chi, a state that can be achieved only by cultivating one's body to the utmost limit. It not only purifies everything it touches, but also heals any injuries. However, it is worth noting that even the medic saint took 40 years to reach this level of cultivation, and yet Noor had learned it at such a young age. Just as she was pondering this, an unexpected guest appeared, a man with his upper body bare. The man never expected that, after over a decade of dedicated sword practice, yet he couldn't even defeat a nobody who came out of nowhere. He thought it was because he was too weak and powerless, but little did he know that his opponent, Zadu, was the strongest human on Earth. At just 13, Zadu could slay dragons and later single-handedly destroyed an entire kingdom. Even the Adventurers Guild, when fully mobilized, could do nothing against him and had to tacitly treat him as a non-existent person. Yet, this formidable opponent found himself powerless against Noor. Just moments ago, after Noor had defeated what he thought was a giant frog, the group was preparing to set off with a demon youth named Rollo. Unexpectedly, Zadu appeared out of nowhere and launched an attack, not on Noor, but aiming for Rollo behind him. His employer had offered him a substantial fee to bring Rollo back. Facing such a request, Noor naturally could not agree and was forced to fight Zadu. Zadu had planned to bypass Noor and directly eliminate Rollo, but his ambush was consistently blocked by Noor. Even his weapon, meticulously crafted from dragon teeth, shattered. Frustrated, Zadu decided he must first deal with Noor. During their fierce duel, Zadu was stunned. He had never before encountered someone who could withstand so many of his attacks. It seemed he needed to use his real skills. Without another word, Zadu stomped on the floor, shattering it and lunging at Noor with lightning speed. When their weapons clashed, a massive airflow surged, blinding the onlookers. Noor was thrown several meters back, but quickly regained his composure, shocked by Zadu's incredible strength. With such a tiny weapon, Zadu could deliver such immense force, even more formidable than the mad bull they had faced earlier. But Zadu was already confused. His strike, which even ordinary S-rank adventurers couldn't withstand, had been blocked in this wild land. Zadu's competitive spirit was instantly ignited, desperately wanting to defeat Noor. The next second he attacked from all directions, but Noor blocked every move. Watching the dizzying battle unfold, the onlookers were stunned. Ines quickly activated a protective shield to prevent the nearby town of Lindbergh from being damaged by the aftermath. At that moment, she recognized Zadu's identity. If she was not mistaken, Zadu was the legendary man, the dead man Zadu, formerly the strongest S-rank adventurer, who at 13 slayed dragons, at 16 destroyed a nation, and at 20 topped the world. He should have been celebrated, but instead he became a notorious executioner. As long as there was profit to be made, he would not hesitate to strike anyone, young or old. The Adventurers Guild once sent several fighters of the same level to suppress him, but all were counter-killed by him. Ultimately, the guild had to regard him as a dead man and abandoned all thoughts of sanctioning him, just to avoid more senseless sacrifices. Yet, such a powerful individual was now evenly matched in battle with Noor. At this point, Zadu had guessed the source of Noor's strength. His reflexive blade deflection and the strange, enormous sword in his hand, which was even more durable than his own short sword crafted from various rare materials. But he wasn't worried, as what he had shown was just the tip of the iceberg of his abilities. Saying this, he tossed a cross-shaped longsword into the air, and the next second, countless silver longswords split from it. His secret technique that had once allowed him to annihilate an entire country single-handedly. Faced with such a barrage of flying swords, Noor quickly found himself at a disadvantage, especially since he was also distracted by the need to protect Rollo beside him. Seeing Noor continuously struck by the silver swords, Inez quickly intervened to help. Her shields could even launch attacks, but Zadu dodged them all. Watching this unfold, Noor knew he couldn't go on like this and was pondering a strategy when he saw the poison fangs of the giant frog, sparking an idea. After crushing the fangs with his body, he had Inez create an opening in her shield. With a casual throw, the shattered fangs shot out like a shotgun, shattering the silver swords in the air. While everyone was somewhat pleased by this turn of events, Zadu launched a surprise attack. Inez was about to be fatally struck when Noor, reacting quickly, successfully blocked the attack. Zadu found this unbelievable and realized that earning money today was unlikely. Reluctantly, he decided to abandon the mission and turn to leave. Seeing this, Noor finally relaxed, but what he didn't know was that everything Zadu had done was a lie. At the moment Noor let his guard down, Zadu suddenly attacked again, but was still successfully blocked by Noor. This time, he left genuinely convinced. Watching Zadu leave, Noor breathed a sigh of relief. However, because Zadu had mentioned that there would be a grand feast in the capital that night, those worried about the kingdom's safety hurried back to the capital at full speed. Their concerns were not unfounded, as by this time, a dragon had already arrived over the capital. The man never imagined that by perfecting his defensive parrying skills to their utmost limit, he would become so powerful that he could slay dragons. Becoming a dragon slayer had always been his dream. However, it wasn't until he experienced it firsthand that he realized this title wasn't as impressive as he thought. Yet this scene left Lindbergh utterly astonished, for the calamitous demon dragon before them was not only the pinnacle of all dragons, but also an entity that could easily destroy the world. Nevertheless, Noor killed the dragon effortlessly. Just a short while ago, with the arrival of the calamitous demon dragon, the entire nation had plunged into panic. The only conceivable opponents who might stand a chance against it were perhaps all the members of the Six Saints together. Ironically, at this moment, monsters launched a full-scale attack, forcing the residents to create an opportunity to flee, leaving them no choice but to deal with these lesser creatures first. At this time, the only person within the nation who had the power and was ready to act was the king. He had once been a figure comparable to the Six Saints. Although he stood no chance of winning against the calamitous demon dragon and his entire kingdom was on the brink of ruin, he decided to fight to the death, hoping at the very least to destroy one of the dragon's eyes. However, as the dragon began to act, the king's hope was shattered because the dragon had no intention of engaging him directly, but instead unleashed a breath that could turn the entire continent to ashes. Seeing this, the king hesitated no longer and launched his most powerful attack, knowing it would leave him severely crippled, if not dead. But with the continent gone, he had no reason to care for his own life any longer. Just as he was about to act, the scene took an unexpected turn. The person who incredulously blocked the calamitous dragon's attack was none other than Noor, a completely unknown F-rank adventurer. At this moment, the most furious of all was the calamitous demon dragon itself. As the apex of the entire continent, it couldn't believe that an F-rank adventurer had made it look so foolish. It directed all its hatred towards Noor. However, as Noor parried another attack, a similar scene occurred again. The dragon was knocked to the ground. But what the dragon didn't know was that Noor was also very puzzled. He had thought the dragons of the world were formidable, but now they seemed much less so. His rapid arrival was largely thanks to Lindbergh's use of a blasting skill, which he used for propulsion, further augmented by a boosting magic spell. In an instant, Noor experienced the speed of a rocket. Had it been anyone else, they might have been killed on the spot, but fortunately, aside from parrying, Noor had years of training and was no ordinary man. After getting used to this speed, Noor saw that the calamitous demon dragon was just about to unleash a powerful attack. Thus, he took the opportunity to use his parry, leading to the current scene. Although it was strange that this dragon was weaker than he had anticipated, once he realized he could handle it, the battle was set to erupt again. Noor parried the dragon's direct attack once more, prompting the demon dragon to decide against a straightforward confrontation. and instead, it planned to use the breath attack that it had failed to execute earlier. High in the sky, Noor could no longer interrupt its casting. The dragon was confident that with just one hit, it could destroy everything below. However, Noor still managed to block the attack with a single strike. This time, it wasn't by exploiting a trick. Noor legitimately blocked the dragon's powerful move, leaving everyone utterly astonished and driving the demon dragon into a frenzy as it roared incessantly nearby. But the king understood what the dragon was thinking. Dragons have always been a proud species, and the calamitous demon dragon was no exception. However, this creature, which had always been so confident in its own strength, was now devastated by someone it had considered a weaker opponent. One can only imagine how it felt. The true weakling was not Noor. This scene was precisely what Linneberg walked in on. However, upon arrival, he found that the demon dragon had already been subdued by Noor. And when he noticed that the dragon's eyes were no longer red, he realized that Noor had actually tamed the demon dragon. The king never expected that the most unassuming man in the crowd could so easily decapitate an enemy general amid thousands of troops and single-handedly destroy an entire army. Upon witnessing this, the king was literally scared out of his wits. Yet this impressive Noor didn't realize his own strength. Just recently, it was he who had subdued the demon dragon, but he believed it was due to Rollo's control that the dragon's gaze had cleared. Although Rollo kept insisting he hadn't done it, Noor thought he was just being modest. Noor assumed Rollo was denying it because he didn't want others to know, so Noor didn't pursue it further. As long as the demon dragon became docile, it was a good outcome. Under Noor's arrangement, Rollo tried to communicate with the demon dragon, asking it to return to its original place. The dragon told Rollo it would obey its master's commands, which left Linneberg and him in disbelief. The proud demon dragon actually considered a human as its master, clearly referring to Noor. But Noor thought that Rollo had tamed the dragon. Shortly after the dragon took off, it was unexpectedly shot down by a beam of laser. It turned out that all this was part of an enemy nation's plan, angered by the overexploitation of the labyrinth that provoked the dragon. As their country faced destruction, they led a magic troop to subdue the dragon, posing as saviors. They were confident because they had built 4 high-power magical radiation cannons. As they prepared to advance, they discovered Noor and his group who had come to check on the situation. However, in their opinion, only Inez was worth mentioning, as she was a legendary figure of renowned fame. It might even be her doing that the capital hadn't been destroyed. But even a shield as strong as a deity would vaporize instantly under such intense heat. However, unsurprisingly, Noor easily blocked the attack. The clueless king thought the cannon had malfunctioned, so he switched to ordering a collective attack by the soldiers. Although Inez could hold them off temporarily, she couldn't withstand a prolonged onslaught. Seeing this, Noor told them to find an opportunity to escape first. He would draw their attention. Noor planned to wait for them to leave before he made his own escape, as he was quite skilled at running away. After all, he had suffered enough as a child trying to get honey from a tree. However, Linneberg misunderstood his intentions. She thought Noor was going to face the enemy army alone. Therefore, despite her limited abilities, she resolved to lend her strength in the end. So, she went behind Noor, intending to send him off to the front lines. But before Noor could clarify, the enemy's cannon had already charged up. The next second, Linneberg's magic shockwave blasted Noor into the sky, forcing him to start parrying. Now, he had no choice but to fight tooth and nail. He continually pushed forward, all to buy more time for Linneberg and the others to escape. This scene completely dumbfounded the king. He couldn't even understand what was happening. He just saw a bunch of weapons inexplicably flying into the sky and then bizarrely crashing down on his own soldiers. Before he could recover from his shock, Noor suddenly charged at him, leaving the king in disbelief. He had just seen Noor on the other side of the mountain. How could he have appeared here so quickly? As Noor closed in step by step, the king realized that he was the target. But just as he thought this, Noor swiftly dashed past him. In the blink of an eye, several cannons had fallen right in front of the king. It was only then that he noticed the weapon in Noor's hand, one of the labyrinth relics he had desperately wanted. Logically, such a heavy weapon shouldn't be movable by an ordinary person. Even the monsters, as the king referred to them, had to use both hands to swing it. Yet, in Noor's hands, it seemed as light as a toy. The king looked at his fallen soldiers and then at the terrifying man in front of him, revealing a sinister smile. In an instant, he was terrified, scrambling onto his horse to flee, his heart filled with fear of Noor. The man was known as the kingdom's sword saint, but he never imagined that the apprentice he had once dismissed as useless would now, using the most basic sword techniques he had taught, single-handedly hold off an entire army. At first, the sword saint didn't recognize Noor and thought he was just some formidable swordsman who had come down from the mountains. After personally thanking Noor with a flourish of his sword, Noor effortlessly finished off hundreds of soldiers. This display of strength was precisely the power Noor had always sought in a swordsman. Unbeknownst to him, his skills now far surpassed even the sword saint. Also arriving on the battlefield were the other 6 saints, each of whom had been Noor's mentors. The mage master first took control of the remaining soldiers, followed by the warrior master leading the charge. The healer, lastly, performed harsh interrogations, as after all, regrowing a hand or foot after treatment wasn't a problem no matter how many times it was needed. When Noor saw his former teachers again, he was extremely excited. 2.5 hours later, after being treated by Lindbergh, Noor recovered from his exhaustion. An inspection of the area confirmed there were no more ambushes. Only the Magus King had escaped. Hearing his masters discuss the Magus King, Noor mentioned he had recently seen a strange old man dressed in shiny gold armor. Oaken speculated that this must be a top-quality armor made from royal metal, undoubtedly belonging to the Magus King. However, given the current situation, the enemy likely had already fled beyond the national borders, and chasing him by ordinary means seemed impossible unless everyone could master flight magic. Upon hearing this, Noor mentioned that flying might actually be possible. Soon they arrived at the site where the magic dragon had fallen. Noor's plan was to pursue by riding the magic dragon. The healer first healed the dragon, with a green glow instantly covering its body, and its severe injuries gradually began to heal. The healer also recognized Noor as the group chatted like old friends reunited. During this time, Oaken expressed concerns about whether the dragon was safe to approach. Noor assured him that everything was under control with Rollo, who could communicate with the dragon's mind. The dragon regained consciousness, and Rollo sensed its anger. It wanted revenge on the Magus Kingdom, and hoped Noor would give it commands. Oaken was shocked at how well Noor had managed to tame the dragon, but Noor credited all to Rollo, unaware that he himself was the real master. Meanwhile, Lindbergh and Inez volunteered to help, but at that moment, Noor's fear of heights kicked in, and he felt nauseous even before they took flight. At that moment, Carew also came over. Noor had learned his stealth skills from him. Since they were planning to pursue on a magic dragon, they naturally needed stealth skills to disrupt the enemy's line of sight. Carew took on this task. The healer also went along, while Oaken stayed behind on the battlefield to manage the remaining prisoners of war. The king had Rhine follow to handle post-war negotiations. Thus, the group mounted the magic dragon and flew towards the Empire. It was then that Sig also recognized Noor. It turned out he had been searching for him all along, and admitted that taking in Noor and nurturing him was an idea far too arrogant. Dandalg agreed with this sentiment. In his view, Noor was like a hero out of a fairy tale. Meanwhile, Noor and his party arrived at a canyon on the edge of the national border. Soon, Lindbergh spotted a fast-moving target. It was the Magus King. However, his position was already within the defensive network of the Magus Kingdom. Crossing over to pursue him would mean they could not easily retreat unscathed. At this time, Inez volunteered to fight. She was truly angry. Her beloved country had been trampled upon, and she could not let the main culprit escape easily. She then summoned a sword of light and shattered the defenses. Everyone present possessed extraordinary powers, and they had no need to worry. In Lindbergh's eyes, Noor's presence was immensely reassuring. Though unbeknownst to her, Noor was on the verge of passing out.